Introduce to you the VP of Engineering of Relic, Mr. Mikey Butler. One side note for me, we are streaming this live on YouTube, and this will also be the recording. You're also going to find it online afterwards. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
All right. Well, I'm going to follow two rules that are always part of my presentations. So number one was from my mother, and she said you always say your thank yous first. So I want to thank Contentful, and in particular Irina and Paolo for the invitation to be here. I am thrilled to be here. No matter what title I have, I'm actually just a developer. Don't be fooled by the fancy title. I'm just a developer, and I'm going to behave like one today. Usually I give this talk in front of hundreds of people, and now I have a small developer audience, and so I'm going to take advantage of it and try to make this as interactive as possible. So I'd like you to actually ask questions in real time. Challenge the assertions I made. Make me work for my mind, okay? This is the deal today. And there's a reason for this. First of all, I think in New Relic we did something fascinating, interesting, something that I think generally we and the industry seems to think is state of the art with respect to transforming our engineering organization. And frankly, I will learn as much from you as you do from me if I get questions. If you sit there and just look at a presentation and then clap at the end, I learn nothing. And I'm all about learning. So your questions where you basically pin me to the carpet and say, well, I don't understand this, I don't believe it, you know, well, what planet are you from? All of these are fair. So I want the tough questions, okay? Now, I know in a crowd like this, people are always afraid to ask the first question. So I have already picked out a victim that I will ask. And I believe her name is Anna, and she's wearing these lovely Batman shoes. Unfortunately, she put her name on the side of the shoe, so I know this. So, the second rule, that was the first one from my parents. The second rule was from the first job I ever had. And that first job was a while ago, as it was in 1977. So this year is 40 years I've been doing this. Yeah. I'm old as dirt. 20 years of that was as an individual contributing engineer, working my way up from maintenance coder to architect, and then a reboot 20 years ago, and working my way up the management ladder. So I was, how do I say it? I think the best way to say it is when I transitioned to management from an architect, they gave me this T-shirt. It says on the front, it says, if you're not part of the solution, and on the back it says you must be part of management. So I think there's something to that. So this gentleman, Dave Eklund, said something. He said, look, well, what happened was the first day I started this job in 77, a new vice president was being introduced to the group. He spent 40 minutes talking about his glories of the past. And my mentor, Dave, leans over and he says, look, if you ever get a chance to present anybody, there's only two things I want to know. Who is this Doomkopf? And what is he going to give me that I can take away from this? So I'm going to basically, you heard who the Doomkopf is. And now I'll tell you what the takeaway is. What the takeaway is that there's something bold that is happening in this industry with respect to changing architectures. We see paradigm shifts all the time, but some are more fundamental than others. I am seeing, since I've been doing this for 40 years, I have been through most of the transformations. And some are greater than others. This one, the one where we are moving simultaneously in two dimensions, which is we are breaking out of the data center and deploying infrastructure worldwide in all sorts of deployment spaces, CDNs, clouds, you name it, is one dimension. The other dimension is the defragmentation, or the fragmentation rather, of the monolith. So the idea of a single process and procedural calls throughout a single process is going away. What seems to be in the future is a microservice-based architecture that is deployed worldwide, and that orchestration between these services is in fact the definition of an application. If we look at New Relic as an example, we have 300 or so services, and depending on how we route calls through those services, we have a different application. So this is the future. Now, the takeaway is and this is what the story is, the takeaway is, it turns out that some transformations are so fundamental that the organization must change. Not just how you do your work, but how the work is organized must change. That was the lesson that we learned very painfully at New Relic, and I'm going to go take you through the journey. So that's your takeaway. Okay. So now I'm going to see if I have audio-visual problems as we go through this. And indeed, my laptop doesn't want to wake up. There we go. And rarely do I type my password right the first time, so we're off to a roaring start. So my marketing team made sure that I put this slide in. One of the things you'll find out is that, my manager has a great way he says, well, I'm not sure where you came by your speaking style, but it's as though someone shot you up with truth serum and then stuck you in front of a crowd. This is the way. So New Relic, how many people know who New Relic is? Do I need to explain? Oh, all right. This slide is history. The one thing I would point out is this number. 1 billion metrics and events showing up per minute. That number is now 1.5. This was only May. This was two months ago. This is the kind of rate of growth we're talking. Crazy. I have this fancy new device I bought. Let's see if it works. All right. So this is the title of the talk. And I already stole my thunder, but I'm going to put the big idea up front. This is intentional. Remember I told you I wanted to be interactive by putting the big idea up front. As I walk through the data to support it, you can pick at it. You can ask those tough questions. And I'm counting on you, Anna. So here's the big idea. The idea is that the need to innovate will force fundamental architectural shifts. We just talked about it. Deployment space is completely different, and the architectural space to take advantage of that is completely different. The monolith does not distribute across the world, right? You need services, you need microservices. When these shifts occur, your product organization must also shift, and the best people, and here's the controversial part. This is the part for the managers who are in the room. This is where you shoot yourself in the head. The best people to design and implement the shifts are the first line contributors and first line managers. And actually, I would take these out in the best case. So listen to what I just said. I said when it comes to defining the next generation of your organization, that the best people to design that are the individual contributors in your organization that you trust. All sorts of data to support that, we'll get into it. But this is the thesis. We had to learn the hard way. Winston Churchill once said, and I mentioned this to Paolo, that Americans always do the right thing after trying everything else first. This was our experience at Relic. So what was our journey to discovery? What happened? So where we started, we were like most companies. We were a startup, very ambitious. We had 2 monoliths that we used as our implementation base. There was a UI monolith and a backend. As you can imagine, multiple teams worked on every service, and they were all embedded in these monoliths. And that sustained us for a while. We started in 2009. This carried us for 4.5, 5 years, around 2014. Well, these things grew. And the reason that these things grew is that we were wildly successful. It's funny, when I was at Sun, I was there for the IPO, and Vinod Khosla, who was the founder of Sun, said there's no cooler mistress than success. This is what we learned. I mean, look at what it is like. These numbers are already obsolete. I put them together 2 weeks ago when I took presentation together, these numbers are already small. We're growing that quickly. Well, that monolith grew, and it grew to the point where, frankly, guess what? We had to blow it up. Yeah, we had to blow it up. And so what we did was a microservice decomposition based on logical flow as we saw it naively as management. So this is a D3 diagram of the 2014 microservices architecture. Now, if you take a good look at it, it's screaming. Now in retrospect, we can see that it is screaming. So take a look at here. Let's see, there we go. Look at the dependencies on some of the services. Right? It's screaming, well, what it's screaming was two things. Management had this reaction. We were doing the lightning bolt. We were successful. We had done this big thing. And this is what we felt. This was the team. When they actually went through the process of using this new thing, well, they basically gave us some very harsh feedback. So we had 3 design principles we were following. We were trying to optimize. So with the monolith, there were 3 big issues. Number one, everybody was working in the same deployment space, so you had contention. I think we all can relate to that. A further issue was that because it was a monolith, let's say you exhausted the capacity, the next time that you wanted to grow, you had to grow another instance of the monolith. So you overpaid for incremental growth. Right? So if each one of these monoliths would support, call it 1,000 users, when I had 1,001, I need to pay for another 1,000, not one. This was a problem. The other was just reliability. It's a monolith. If you kick it over, everybody that's in this monolith dies. So it had no resiliency. So resiliency, cost of scalability, and resource contention or development model contentions were the things we were trying to fix. So with the microservice architecture circa 2014, we did in fact get, well, kind of 2. So we did get resiliency because now code is being encapsulated in these services, and if one of them falls over, it's pretty easy to point to another service, have HA, load balancing, this sort of thing. So we got that. We sort of got incremental growth, right? That if I needed to add a couple of services, I didn't have to grow the whole monolith, I could incrementally grow that. But the thing that really suffered, and what was for us the major driver, which was developer productivity, was worse off than it was before. So we did something that I think, now that I look back on it, was a great thing for us. It was actually, for me personally, for my boss, where we stuck our neck out, a moment of truth. At the time, it felt uncomfortable. Now, in retrospect, it looks and feels like a bold move that is rewarded. But that's only in retrospect. At the time, what we did was admit, as managers and as a company, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. Right? The ego, it burst our ego so badly. What we had created and spent a year, almost 2 years, trying to manifest, turned out to blow up in our face. One path says, we'll try again. The other path, and the more courageous path, is, ooh, this is such a big mistake. We don't know what we're doing. We took that path. And much credit to my boss, much credit to the organization around us. We realized we had stakeholders in sales and marketing and other places. And we are now saying to them, we screwed up so badly that for the next 6 months, we are going to redefine what engineering is. We don't even know what the outcome is going to be. But we're going to take that risk. And what do you think? Well, you can imagine what they thought. Well, okay, put down the crack pipe. No, honestly, honestly, why? The theory supports this, and we give them all the wheres and whys and wherefores and blah, 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 blah. And they basically, one by one, kind of came around, and the calculus that we had, the political calculus was, well, we'll let you do what you want, but understand if you're wrong, we're going to shoot you. So we took the risk. So what did we do? We took our best people to study the problem, and not only that, we had them guided by an industry expert that had worked in several other companies, and in fact, about 60% of the companies that are doing state-of-the-art microservices engineering, we hired that consultant to come on board, and I'll review his name for him. And we basically said to him, we don't know what we're doing. You've been successful. We want a process where we take the same journey they took, and we want the highest probability of success possible. This is what we want. So he went away for about a month and defined what his interaction model would be with us as a company. He came back and said, I need your best 10 people across the organization in all different charters. I need them for 6 months, and they're not going to do anything else. They're going to do this. What they're going to do is, from the ground up, define your organization. And what we will do with you management is that you don't get to come into the room. We don't love you. What you get to do is sit on the sidelines, and what we'll do is show up once a month during this 6-month period, give you a report on what we're doing, and then you get to vote thumbs up or thumbs down. That's all you get to do, literally in a room, thumbs up and thumbs down. And then if the majority of you say thumbs up, we continue. If the majority of you give thumbs down, we will ask why, and we may take a different path. But you're not in the room defining your organization. And the why of that was very simple. First of all, your track record isn't very good. We had just screwed up. So we didn't have a leg to stand on. And second of all, he pointed out really what was the underlying theory, which is some problems are 50,000-foot problems, and some problems are 50-foot problems. That it turns out the things that undo a lot of the microservices movement that companies do are 50-foot problems, and we'll get into that. And the team that knows about the 50-foot problems are the team that directly does the work. So what we're asking of your management, this consultant said, is to take the leap of faith that you not being in the room, because you will influence the outcome by your very presence. If you speak up, people will tend to defer to you. We don't want you in the room, and we're going to take the 50-foot approach with those who really know what's going on. They're going to come back and incrementally propose this new organization, and you get to vote thumbs up or thumbs down. So what did they come back with? What were their findings? The first was that in our pursuit of microservices decomposition, we forgot Conways Law. Now, what's that? Conway is a hero of mine. Now I love the guy. I didn't know him before, but I love him. And what Conway's most famous principle is this: organizations which design systems, that's pretty much engineering now, are constrained to produce designs which are copies of their communication structures. Listen to what that says. Constrained by communication structures, not by your architecture, not by the code, how you talk to each other. What it turns out he is saying is that communication is difficult. It is more difficult than the active creation of code. And we as organizations take the path of least resistance on communication. It is human nature. If I have an organizational boundary between me and the next team, and the model is I talk up to my management and then they talk down to their management and then it goes, this is how we communicate. Or even if I go across directly to the other team, that communication barrier is there. And so we implicitly avoid it. In your case, your manager says, I want the code by X date. You're going to take the path of least resistance on communication because it's hard. And essentially, following Conway's Law, how you communicate is implicitly dictating what you create. This is an example from our history and lore. We actually ask all of the 300 or so engineers that are in Relic engineering to participate in an exercise that took the day. We asked them not to talk about the architecture, but to sketch the communication pathway between the teams. This was the diagram. Now, you can look at this. It doesn't take a genius to see this size. But it is, sorry, oh, right, a question, yes.
Maybe I can touch one. But wouldn't Conways Law essentially say that a monolith would be impossible because the monolith is basically not a communication structure?
No.
You have to, generally, when you work with a messy monolith, you have to work across the entire thing to implement your way because there's not qualified interfaces in it.
Conways Law is a little subtler than that. What it is saying is that we will create structures that are analogs of our communication model. Our communication model 2009 to 2014 was essentially one big team. Hence the monolith. Now we broke it up into a bunch of different teams and a bunch of different services and used the same communication model, and this is what came up. Yeah. So when we took a look at this, of course, well, let's just say I haven't had hair for a while, but when I saw this, I was never going to grow any. Yes.
How is that diagram defined?
What each one of the arrows these are teams, and what each one of the arrows represents is a necessary communication that must occur between teams for another team to do their work. And if you see, there's no clear one-way, there's no clear path. Now, this is actually almost unmanageable, right? It is a clear 50-foot level view of our communication structure, but it is so complex we couldn't do much with it. So this was the result. We'll talk about how we fixed it later. I'm going to keep it in suspense. The other thing is we forgot Fowler's rules. Martin Fowler is kind of the godfather of microservices architecture. He actually turns out to dabble a lot and be the leading thinker on how to organize engineering for microservices architectures because they are related, and he also knows about Conways Law. So if I could use the power of analogy, the violation of Conways Law was essentially like us being in a car and having our foot on the brake. That our communication model was in the way of us communicating and producing code. Fowler's rules kind of go in the other direction. It answers the question of how do I step on the gas? Assuming I get Conway's laws figured out, right? How do I accelerate? How do I get the most out of a microservices-based team? Okay. So to give you an example, these are the characteristics of a microservice architecture a la Martin Fowler. Some of these are probably pretty familiar to you, but the ones I would highlight are these, where you see the red. This is where he draws the conclusions of what a microservices-based organization should look like. And where you see red is where, quite frankly, you have the opportunity to step on the accelerator. The things I'd call out as particularly interesting are decentralized governance, decentralized data management, smart teams with dumb communication structures, and the idea that we're product rather than project aligned. We'll talk about this a little later. But this is the tee up for what our team, remember they went off for 6 months. They came back and said, well, you made two really big mistakes. One of them was you had your foot on the brake by violating Conways laws, and you didn't step on the gas by not following Fowler's principles. This is what they came back with. So out of that was a big moment of truth. This is where After 6 months, we had the final thumbs up or thumbs down. And this was March or so of 2015. We basically voted thumbs up to do this. And I realized from a management perspective, what we were voting thumbs up to. We didn't have anything to do with this. Individual contributors in our team had constructed this. We were taking the leap of faith that this was going to work. We were in control of any of it. I was teasing Paolo this morning. It was, to me, it's how I imagine it will be like the first time I get in a truly self-driving car and there's nobody there behind the wheel, right? It's like the first time you get in that car, it's just going to be scary. I don't care if they get you there safely or not, right? I am going to feel like I'm going to die until I get there, right? This is the way it was. It's like, oh my God. We just had this consultant coming from the outside. We had a bunch of people who normally don't do anything to do with organizations define what we're doing, and we're about to jump off the cliff and execute. That's what we did. And this is what came out of it as an organizing set of principles. Number one, durable, full ownership teams organized around business capabilities with the authority to choose their own tasks and the ability to complete those tasks independently. So the whole idea of MRDs and all of this kind of nut goes bye-bye. Reduced central control, and from emphasizing information flow from the center and decisions making at the edge. Management is no longer in the position of answering two of the three big questions. The big questions are, why does the business do something? What is the business reason for something? That management did answer. But the what we're doing to solve the problem and the how we're doing it now is exclusively inside the team. And they get to choose what they work on. They don't get told. And you eliminate dependencies between teams through org structure changes and tooling improvements. That's kind of a no-brainer when you saw the communication model we saw earlier. So, yeah, it was time. It was time. Yeah, this reorg was preceded by a conversation where my boss and I are sitting down with the CEO, and the CEO in Relic is an engineer. He's a coding engineer. You'll someday he will come your way, and you will see. He was here just at the Future Stack Berlin. He's a nerd. He's a data nerd, right? So this is where he says, if you screw up my product organization, I am so going to shoot you. You will never work in Silicon Valley again. But we did it. So this was our motto, right? We trusted the engineers to really look at the problem much more inclusively, much more nuanced than management could ever do. We optimized for agility. Now, agility is a subtle concept, and I'll try to explain it as we see it. What agility is not only how fast you get things done, but how fast you can switch to something else. Why we want agility is that when you look at the math, velocity is actually gated by work in progress. That let's say I have a team that really executes very, very quickly, but they have 6 months worth of work to complete before they free up. Well, it doesn't matter how fast they execute, right? So we create bundles of work we call lovingly MMFs. Look at them as a 3-week sprint. This is the delivery unit. And at the end of the delivery unit, there's no more work for that unit. It is done, and you can move on to something else. Now, if you don't have something else to go on to, if we don't switch you to something else, whatever is the next thing MMF you want to do, which typically goes on the first one you get to do. But if something comes up and we need your team and what expertise you have with something else, you get pointed there. So we optimize for agility, which is speed and freedom from a long queue of work. So how do we deal with Conways Law? So of course, that's all about breaking dependencies. This obviously is a little too complicated for human comprehension, so we go with a computer model to simplify. We do route optimization through a couple of different passes, and we get this. This is the current delivery model for New Relic. This is the current communication model for New Relic. It is vastly simpler than where we started. It has vastly reduced the dependencies. This was the work of our architecture team, basically putting all of that handwritten chart into route optimization software and running it through countless iterations until we came up with this.
Is that still the same number of teams or services as before?
Yes, it is. It turns out that the next piece of the puzzle is how we were able to simplify this. If we kept the old organization with the old, what we call charters, what they work on, you can't really move the communication model, right? It's kind of set by how we communicate, what's the least path of least resistance, and the need to communicate, which is, my software is dependent on your software, or it's dependent on your software. So part of what is going on here that is yet to be explained, but will soon be, is that we changed the charters of the team to align with this communication model. So on the other side of the upscale project, teams were not working on the same things. They were typically working on a subset of the things they used to be working on. And we did a 90-degree rotation. So in the past, there were UI teams, there were middleware teams, there were backend teams, and we had to coordinate across all of those teams to get anything done. And what we did was rotate 90 degrees, and inside of a team, and I'm stealing my thunder from a slide, a couple slides forward, now teams are largely autonomous. So they have UI people, they have middleware people, they have backend people, and they largely don't have to work with other teams in order to get work done, which is how we ended up with this route simplification. If we kept the old structure, we could not simplify. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, because you no longer need to go to another team that has all the UI people.
Correct.
Display them. You just do yourself.
Correct. So the goal of services, when you think about a service itself, what do you want from a service? Well, I want this autonomous thing that's sitting up there. I pass it messages and it does its work and passes back, an ACK or an ACK. That's what I want. I want that independence in the architecture. I'm steering something. Oh, I see the camera over there. That's what I want. But I can't get that if I'm dependent on these other teams. So part of the exercise, since we want services to be independent of themselves and to be essentially these entities that can be talked to and get a response, we want that isolation on the team level. Does that make sense? There's an analogy there, please. It could be focus the camera. I think they've been way out of focus. Good.
Trying.
There we go. You got it.
Back, since you are out of the screen.
Oh, I'm the one messing it up.
Yeah, I have to stand here apparently. That works.
I didn't want to stand in front of the screen, but I didn't realize that the camera would be so. Please.
How did you align the tech stacks between these cross-functional teams? Like everyone, let's say each team has a UI guy, he works by himself, so we have chapters or.
Oh, boy. This is getting into some good stuff. So let me actually get to the presentation, and then we can really dive in. It sounds like I've set the hook enough for really deep questions.
What's the names of these teams if you know that are totally independent from the other teams, like these three at the top?
These are not teams. This is communication pathways.
Yeah, but these points, what like the communication with the arrows, right? And the points is the self-independent team that contains of like very backend front.
Yes, for example, these teams have no dependencies at all, and they can ship.
Yeah, what's the name of the teams? Do you know of these three?
Sure. Basically, the browser team, the mobile team. It turns out that if you're down in this part of the diagram, typically what you have is a dependency on the back end. Where you have less of a dependency on the back end, and you can actually do the back end work or the middleware work inside your team, and not rely on anyone else's services, then you can ship directly. So we have 6 or so products. Basically, the 2 you see, 3 up the top, these would be mobile synthetics and the browser team. The other products depend on the back end and depend on the scaling from the back end. And hence they have encumbrances that need to be met on the way. So dealing with Fowler's rules. This is where things get interesting. Remember, this is where we step on the gas. So we started with what is a team? What is a team? We have an old notion. Did it match the new notion? No. The first thing about a team is that they're full ownership, not just full stack. So the UI, middleware, backend, this is full stack. Full ownership says they own the economics, what they do. They own being optimal in their choice of what to do next. Remember, we gave them the autonomy to choose. Largely, they have the autonomy to choose, but they are held accountable for being optimal in their choice or as close to it as possible. So they own the economics in addition to the technologies. They are T-shaped. What we mean by that is that we don't allow over-specialization. We don't allow single points of failure in a team if we can avoid it. So 85% of the things that need to be done inside of a team can be done by any one member of the team. And then each one of them sort of specializes. And they're, to the degree they specialize, there's no one else in the team who has that specialty. They are responsible for training someone else so that they don't create a single point of failure.
But in a vast pool of teams, resources available that you can choose and then you optimize for agility, correct?
Yes, but it's not a vast pool.
Okay.
A team is a team and it's durable. Remember, one of the manifestos says a durable team. So it typically is somewhere around 6 or 7 people, maybe even smaller, 5, and it is a whole.
And they own the product.
They own their services.
The service to the whole life cycle from
Birth to death.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, sorry,
Please.
what do you do when a team gets misaligned with a service duty? Like, for example, you have a service that has only developed an API to be consumed by our services, and now suddenly it needs a user interface, and you don't have any developers on that. Do you shift it actually from other teams, or do you try to hire new?
So this is a great question. So the reality is that simplification that we saw, the route optimization, well, that's theoretical limit. The reality is money. So we have a contract. The contract goes like this. You are responsible for your team's output. If you can get another team to commit to do work on your behalf, let's say it's the dependency, and it turns out that they can do it, and you can count on them, then you get the permission to tie them into your project. If in fact they say, no, we can't do it, or they can't make the time commitment, then you get to do it. But you get to do it in cooperation with them. Since they own the service, they are essentially co-pilots with you as you are doing your work to add whatever functionality you need to that service. But the organizing principle says you are responsible for getting that stuff out on time, high quality. And if someone else can help you, great. If they can't, that's not another team's problem, that's your problem.
I'm not responsible for the maintenance of that stuff.
No, you are responsible for the contribution. They are ultimately responsible for the long-term maintenance, which is why they sidekick with you. So that they get the yay or nay vote. Typically, the way we do it is a mob programming model, where the person who's doing the work is there doing the work, and then they've got a sidekick who's watching it and saying yes, no, yes, no. Please.
So that means that in terms of technology, there is the possibility of having some, not shared ownership, but shared access and to certain parts of the code. Like let's say, like given on this principle, a team needs to get something done and needs to change something in a service that another team is usually maintaining, but they cannot commit on making that change for that specific project. So
yes.
that team is going to change it.
Correct. So it becomes a collaborative in situations where essentially the zero-sum game says that the other team cannot play. Now, obviously, you'd love a world where the true experts are only the ones that touch it, but that's not the reality. And again, back to agility. We said the thing where ultimately optimizing is getting things to market quickly and not having a lot of work in progress. So obviously, a hard dependency on another team violates both of those. Okay? So the teams are T-shaped. Oh, sorry. I love it. I can't go to the next slide. I'm feeling very excited. Sorry. I'm going to steal my thunder. There, please.
Your teams are getting more and more independent from each other.
We use the word autonomous. We pretty it up a little bit.
Yeah. Some of you still maintain that there is a certain coherence across the company in terms of
yes.
technology and so on.
So your question, if I rephrase your question, how do we avoid chaos with this model? Is that I'm overstating the case, but it's kind of
external technology first,
yes.
and my own personally applications because of my software licenses or reaching with your own stuff. Put that aside, but also you might have completely different technologies used, and that's fine as long as one team is doing one thing. But as soon as the collaboration, you might get.
Yeah, and see, because teams are ultimately responsible, they get to deal with this. Before they didn't have to deal with this problem. So if they choose some oddball technology that no one else knows and no one else can help them, then guess what? No one else can help them. And so they're motivated to not do that.
Does it scream me up if I'm like an upstream team from them and I have to fix something downstream because they don't have the resources, they use a language I've never seen in my life before?
Yes, which is why the dependent teams actually negotiate with the teams they're dependent upon so this doesn't happen. Again, everyone is looking out for the best interest of each other. It's not one of these, I win, you lose. Everyone has a commitment to each other, both inside the teams and across teams. Yeah, we dropped off. Apparently that doesn't work. So there's, I quoted this story when I was talking earlier to the engineering team, and I'll do it again because we engineers tend to think about worst case, downside. This is how we are trained. What can go wrong? With organizations, there's reason because of the way human beings behave in stressful or bold situations, there's reason to be more optimistic. And I'm going to share a story that will illustrate that. And I think some of you have heard it already, but the majority of you do not. So in 1989, there was a big earthquake in San Francisco. I think just about the whole world knew about that. I was actually on the Bay Bridge driving to the World Series game. I had World Series tickets. The two hometown teams were competing in the World Series. So I was very excited, and I'm driving across, and the earthquake hits while I'm on the bridge. Luckily, the part of the bridge that broke was behind me. Thank you. But I realized when listening to the radio that there is not going to be any game because when I hit scan, the radio station that was broadcasting was gone, as was every radio station. So it was clear that the entire electrical grid was gone and that there wasn't going to be any game. Now, the Bay Bridge connects Oakland to San Francisco. I worked in Oakland and I lived in San Francisco. When I got to the base of the Bay Bridge, I had to make my way all the way across San Francisco. That's 7 miles of very dense traffic. I have never made it across San Francisco any faster than I did that day. There were no lights. Every human being walking or in a car was observing strict first come, first serve. No one took advantage of anyone else. Unlike every other day since then or before then. When the chips are down and people feel connected to each other, they operate in ways that amaze you. Your pessimistic assumptions about what will happen will be violated. They will constantly surprise you with how resourceful and how connected and beneficial they can be. This is the underlying bet here. If you approach this kind of a reorg with worst case scenario thinking, you can attach your fears to just about everything we do in something like this. Now, we're trained as engineers, we are taught to think this way. But one of the bold things that a manager has to do is free themselves from that and embrace the higher possibilities, which is what we do. So yes, we painted a nightmare scenario that could happen if everyone is lower motivated. But you see, we went through a process where everyone felt represented. Everyone felt as though they bought into this. Everyone felt like it was their baby. Just like you raising your child is a very important thing. We knew we had honest conversations with the team, how we were sticking our neck out, how the company was counting on us, how, at least the management team would get fired if we didn't get it right. We made it very clear that there was an emotional reason for people to believe, and they did so. And there'll be an interesting demonstration of that in a moment. Please.
So you said everybody bought into it.
Yes.
How did you go from 10 people in the room for 6 months to everybody bought?
Well, this is where having that consultant was a wonderful move. So again, because management wasn't involved, we could not do any of the selling. The 10 people did. So they fanned out across the organization. They organized any number of different meetings and channels, electronic channels, to basically have high incoming rates of concerns and answered them all constantly. They brought the organization along. They realized they had to bring the organization along. They made it part of their work for that 6 months. So nothing works better in bringing an engineer along than another engineer that you trust. Again, these were the leaders in the organization. These were people who were not managers, but viewed as the technical leaders. They're basically saying, look, we believe in this. Let me help you believe. And for 6 months, they kept working on it and working on it and working on it. So invert control. Your question about, who was the gentleman? There was a question about, hey, how does all this not descend into chaos? Yes. So autonomy is a very interesting thing. So we have now 45 teams, each of which are viewed as autonomous. They act as these individual molecules. So how do you get them to line up for a big project? The way we do that is that there is a call and response. So management does have a role, but it's not the traditional role of telling teams how to operate or what to do. It is only telling teams what is important to the business, why we need certain things delivered. And it is in a stack, in a list of about 15 different initiatives. Almost every one of those initiatives requires multiple teams to work together. The top 3 are viewed as so important that if my team can help with those top 3, and they are ranked, the top 3 are a group, and from 4 to approximately 15 are just one big lump. If you can work on one of the top 3, you're honor bound to say yes to that. If you can't, none of your services are needed for any of the top 3. You get your choice of any of the remainders, and it's your choice. So there's a balance between adherence to company high priorities and autonomy. So in the set of 15, there are 3. If you can connect to them, you must work on them. That is your honor code. But 4 through 15, your choice. You pick the one that you think has the most value to the business.
So if those things need multiple teams to work on,
yes,
you're going to have a coordination issue.
Mm-hmm.
How do you solve that? Do you just say no to deadlines, or how do you? Is it even a concern for you to make sure that all the teams that need to work on that thing are able to deliver at the same time? Does that happen, or is it a problem?
Well, so the top 3 have program managers that are dealing with what I'll call the critical mass necessary to make them successful in the timeline. So that's a traditional coordination function. The others are a swarming model. Now remember, I mentioned that there was an incremental delivery. So let me drill into that, a thing called steel threading. And I talked about it a little earlier, but what it says is that every 3 weeks, I'm going to put something done. Now, it may be small, but it is done. It is delivered. It is in production. It is good. Now, let's say I have something in that 4 through 15 that requires 5 teams, and only 3 can play the game right now. The 3 that can play the game, their work is done. So I'm 3/5 of the way complete. I still have 2/5. The next time other teams can get to it, the ones that couldn't play now because they're looking at the top 3, they complete, and then it goes on. So the 4 through 15 don't actually typically have hard deadlines. They are driven by a combination of the teams swarming, selecting what they think is important. Typically there's, back to the how teams operate in goodwill. Let's say the 3 need the other 2. They allow me. Hey, we can get this out if you 2 play now. I know you can do it later, but how about now? We'll owe you a favor when your time comes. So these things happen behind the scenes. Again, everyone is motivated by the same motivation, which is succeeding as a company, succeeding as a larger organization, not as individuals, not even in the case of one of those, what we call product groups, those 15, not even as an individual team, but as a collective.
I see that potential becoming a problem in a business first company, rather than a tech first company, where business may go into commitments with buying CAD space, purchasing inventory, building a new warehouse, and then the systems must be in place to enable that investment to bear fruit, and then that would create very hard deadlines. So it should probably require really hard logging under your system.
And yes, so understand we're talking about something here that is apropos to a next generation software engineering organization, and probably not apropos to the organization that you propose, right? We benefit in software from the fact that everything is soft, right? We're only limited by our imagination, right? There's no laws of physics involved, right? It's very little, right? So we're capitalizing on that elasticity with this model that we couldn't do on something that was obviously bound by laws of physics or economics. I saw another hand up.
Yeah, it was more or less a question on the same lines. I mean, how much do you think you need support from the whole company to realize this kind of organization? Or to which extent can you afford to have parts of the company that don't stick to this model? And it was, again, really tied to that other question related to this. Like if you have a business-driven company where you have other departments that align to different rules, can you still manage to apply this model?
Yeah, no, so we're not this autonomous collective that operates on our own, right? We have a marketing organization, a sales organization, we have customers. So the team that is putting together those product briefs, those 15 different things, is an amalgam of all of the different teams, and they're the ones setting the priorities. So it nets in, what do the customers want? What is on our roadmap? What is the big deal this quarter? Should we go after it? All of these things are in the mix.
Still, you are allowing a certain degree of freedom to the teams to decide what.
Correct. And the reason for that is back to Fowler's rules, that the teams actually contain a wisdom which in most organizations is not utilized, is unfortunately, given the top-down decision-making models, by the time the decision reaches the team, there's almost no degrees of freedom for the team to operate. This is inverting that. This is what this is about. This is inverting it. The team gets all the autonomy that they can possibly have, and what is left goes to management, not the other way. It is a bottom-up power structure.
That's where my question enters is, can you allow to have teams that take ownership of what to work on and decide what to work on, and having top-down prioritization of features or things, and then maybe that part of the company that asks for the prioritization also wants deadlines or estimates on.
Sure. Yeah, and we do have that as an issue. Our posture is, again, with the agility model, agility has, since we want the option of switching people between projects very quickly, that makes it hard to make hard commitments for a lot of things, right? A hard commitment sort of says dedicated resources, or close to it. That's a non-agile waterfall model. Still, it doesn't free us from the need to be predictable, which is why we have the top 3. That's the headroom, if you will, for where we will essentially entertain a hard date commitment. It's not literally true, but that's kind of the basic rule. And where we will staff it so that we make that date. And again, this is why teams that can participate must adhere to attach themselves to the top 3. Now, there's still interrupt-driven things. Oh, customer X just used the .NET agent, and this one async call isn't working with the new framework. But can the .NET team help us? That goes to their product manager and goes to the team, and then they take a look at that versus what else they have in play, and they make the call. Now, if the marketing team doesn't like the call or the sales team doesn't like the call, there's an escalation path to say, wait a minute, we understand why you made the call, but we want a court of appeals. We want to take a look at it, and we do have this appellate process.
That also means that you have full transparency on the roadmap, both for the business side and technical.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that underpins all of this, I didn't make a point of it in the presentation, but it's clear I should make a point in this moment, is that along with what a team is and how they are structured, what changed was the data model. How did data flow through the system, the tools that we use, and the processes that we use. And we actually have an operations team, it's small but very gifted, that is actually, as a result of us making this bold move, have redefined the underlying data model, tools, and processes that we use. That had to change. So much of what you're wondering about, well, how do we tie together these organizations outside of our group, is that we now have a set of shared tools that they can actually go to, make their requests, see the response from the team, challenge it if necessary, escalate if necessary. All of this is now enabled by, let's say, common use of the tool chain.
Not getting one part. You're saying every team has one service, one fiefdom, if you want, that's responsible for. But you also want to be able to switch or move teams between projects quickly. Because my service is not relevant. Well, like I have the project that is a top business priority that's only relevant to that service or to the subset of services. And they have some other relevant things to do because customers started using the service excessively and they need to scale up and they need to run a bunch of resources on that. Mm-hmm. Would you then move a team from a different service to that service temporarily?
No.
So how do you scale that?
That happens within the team. You see, there's no perfect answer, right? You are playing a zero-sum game with resources. There is no, let's say I did say, okay, this other team over here, you start working on this service. Guess what? They have no knowledge of this service. They can't really help, right? It's a fool's errand. They can't really help. The team that owns that service is the one that can really help, but they're busy. So not everyone is necessarily busy on the same thing. They can actually do some distribution of work within one of these sprints. Perhaps a subset of the team works on the customer issue and some of the main line of the team works on a feature request. Again, they're running their own little small business. They get to deal with these realities. We do not make the world simpler for our teams. We give 6 to 7 people. We do not make the world simplified for the team. We give them the full blast of reality and they deal with it. And they deal with it brilliantly, more brilliantly than management ever would. So this is the leap of faith that you're taking, is that the engineers and the teams that they create actually have more gifts, more capability than the current traditional top-down model allows them to realize. This being a bottoms-up model makes the assumption that we're going to give them as much autonomy as we possibly can, and what is left falls to management, not the other way around.
What did you do with all the managers that have?
Well, as it turns out, there's a lot of stuff for managers to do when it comes to actually the care and feeding of this organization. Well, actually, let me give a more complete answer. So our tradition never was to have managers really kind of babysitting teams. Our teams were already pretty autonomous, right? The traditional model of, the manager as God, we didn't really have that. So we didn't actually change the manager's remit that much. They're still in the teams. They're still managing the work. They now have to pay attention to a few more things like the economics of their business. So for them, for the vast majority of the managers, there's one manager for each one of these 45 teams. The vast majority of managers are still in the team and doing even more than they would have done before and actually really liking it. The directors are still necessary because we have to have a certain number of teams reporting to someone who's responsible for an area of interest. And then the VPs. So the traditional hierarchy above the first level manager didn't change, and the first level manager didn't change. What in fact happened is they have more work to do now because they don't just manage the technology output of their team, they are managing a small business, along with the product manager and the designers and everyone else that's in the team with different T-shaped roles. Please.
So if they're managing a small business and they're really like that work, they have costs, obviously.
Yes.
What do they have to balance against those costs?
Revenue.
How is that revenue?
Well, that's a funny question, actually. That's one of the things, this is the other reason why I don't have hair. Actually, there are a lot of reasons. This is one of many. Because we had a history of not having cost attribution, we're retrofitting on top of an existing revenue stream and revenue model attribution to teams. Not only the revenue side, but the cost side, and we're working on that. In fact, that's one of the things I'm driving. So this is an example of what I have to worry about, is what is a fair and equitable one, and what I do is I put it out on the team. We have teams that are working on this problem, and it needs to be fair and equitable, it needs to be believable, and it needs to align with what our friends in finance see as their reality, that it can't be some disconnected thing. So just like any of the other problems, teams are not just focused on technologies. They're focusing on running a business. This includes this attribute. We're taking a journey over 3 years. The first part of the journey was that product brief we talked about, where teams are focused on the right work. This is the first part of it. The second part of it is, are you delivering in an agile way, meaning no work in progress, and also putting out a complete delivery every 3 weeks. The third star, we call them, is having the right economics. That is a 15-month journey that we are now approximately 6 months into it, still 9 months to go, still a work in progress. But aspirationally, we know that we want the teams to understand the revenue associated with what they do and understand the costs and be responsible for things like return on investment, margin, contribution, all of these things. Please.
I like the way you put that with economics, because my question is related to burnout.
Yes.
Which I think falls under the economics components. I think, this model is great. This is how I like to work. It capitalizes on things that engineers are good at, except managing burnout. Right? Because when you're empowered to sort of run a full stack and to run your business model and stuff, it's great. But then you don't you fall in love with what we're promising, and the more experience you gain, the larger your support comes with this. Oh, now I work in all these other areas now, and now it's going to company. Now everyone emails me because they know it works in this area. So is that where you're at in the phase 2 now, where managing economics, including burnout?
Perfect straight line for the next conversation. Self-selection. Now, this is an idea that even the consultant, when he brought it to the table, even he said, this is really crazy, but you should go for it. Which is, that's not a good way to sell people. So what selection is, and in fact, you can actually see what's going on here, is that when we started this project, this upscale they call it, no team had people on it. They only had managers. The managers read each one of these tables, and they're 40, some of them spread out to this big bowl. And engineers self-select into the team based on their desires, their interests. Now, obviously that brings with it a problem. What happens if it's somebody that doesn't have anybody? What happens if the person that shows up doesn't have that much in the way of skills? Guess what? That's the team's problem also. Balancing this. We don't want, obviously it's unwise to have, let's say, all senior contributors who, and no one to do the work that's not so challenging. So you have to be wise there. When we saw, back to my conversation about the bridge and getting across San Francisco, when people saw teams with no one there, they basically said, this is our company, this is my product team. I'm going to basically commit to a 6-month tour of duty in this team over here. And then 6 months from now, when someone else has a vacancy in the area I want, I'll move. But in the meantime, I have to pay the whole business. So burnout is something we almost don't have. And the reason is we explicitly every 9 months or so have a mini self-selection event. And anytime anyone moves between teams or leaves the company, there's an opening. People who are inside the company have a right of first refusal. They can raise their hand and say, I want to select into the team. So the attrition that we have is actually far below industry average because you don't have to leave the company to find a new professional opportunity. Yes.
So when you talk about durable teams, it's not that they are static along
forever
across the lifespan of the one's job in the company. So actually people are free to move, but within certain reasonable periods.
Correct. Again, they're running a business, so they get to deal with this. Yeah. Yes. Oops. Yes.
How do you handle salary in such a dynamic model?
How do we handle
salary?
Salaries?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't pay people. This idea. Yeah, that's the next slide. No. So I'm not sure I see what the problem is. Tell me what you see as the problem.
Yes, it's so difficult to judge people's performances if they can switch teams, if they can do this, if they can do that. How do you decide that?
So again, the unit of reference in all conversations is the team. So let's say I'm on a team, I'm the lead in this team, everybody loves me, they are reviewing me when review time comes. My team reviews me. Now, I switch to another team where I'm a neophyte, I'm new. Well, guess what? My first few reviews reflect that. But I'm okay with that because I'm learning something new. I expect to not be the lead person, but to have the skills down. I'm actually kind of grateful for the opportunity to switch and to learn and not have to leave the company to do this. And in fact, if you think about the reality, what is the chance that you could leave a company where you were in one area of expertise and join another company in a completely different area and have them say yes when you have no experience? It's unlikely.
You have companies in companies, basically.
Yes, yes. So typically if you transition between companies, you're obligated or essentially guided by the market to be in an area that's very similar to where you were, because they need to reduce the risk of you joining and know that you can do the work. Well, we take the leap of faith based on who you are as a person, because we know you as a person, and we saw you as a lead. We saw that what you're capable of learning. We know that this is new for you, but we also know who you are and how well you're motivated, and quite frankly, that your learning curve will be shallower than, let's say, typical. Yes?
Do you do the little squad skills drivers thing?
No, what is this one?
It's a way to organize an IT department where you have squads, like these individual teams with these squads.
Yes.
Then you have tribes.
Yes, yes.
And that were like related to each other, and then you have chapters or guilds.
Yeah. So actually, the same person who did the Spotify model is the consultant we hired. We don't call it that because I guess he decided to rebrand them for us. So we have teams. We have communities of practice, which are teams that tend to be aligned either by adjacencies. They are, if you look at the string of dependencies, they are along that string of dependencies, or perhaps they're vertical. They happen to have the same technology stack that they embrace. So there's collectives along this line. They are informal. They're not prescribed. They're self-organizing.
So you don't create like cookies for those structures that are just organic.
They're organic and they're in the service of that higher purpose of teams working through problems that are multi-team or beyond the capability of any one team. So they essentially form and demand to need. Please.
Regarding new hires, for example, let's say my team is very specific from this area. Do I have the sophisticated like define say I want to hire this person, should I find a profile that's more dynamic and more?
This is a very good question, and one that I mentioned in one of the conversations I had. But I didn't mention it to a larger engineering team, so I'll mention it now. So we have the concept, we are moving to the concept of what we call a bundled hire. So one of the things that we discovered over time is that these 45 teams that we had would, when they hired, would hire such a narrow skill set that people to join that team couldn't actually go to another team. That, for example, there was some harebrained technology that no one in the team wanted, and so this person gets to do that, and then they can't go anywhere else. So we changed our hiring model, where depending on whether it is an area of the product or an area of technology, we actually, at any one time, we're doing a lot of hiring. For example, this year we're going to go from 300 to 400 people, so a lot of hiring. Every team has got some hiring they're doing. And so what happens is a team that, when it is time to do hiring, several teams essentially cooperate. They are now considered a bundle. And each team puts into the hiring team, the decision-making team, one person. And then as the candidates flow through, there's essentially an averaging across all of the teams that are participating on who they select. And the decision of whether they join a new Relic, not a particular team, whether they join New Relic happens at the bundle level. Now, what that gives us is a shorter timeline to make a decision. Because the teams that we had the team model, they were hyper-specialized. They were looking for, the unicorns of the world. And that took forever. Then when they found a unicorn, when somebody else wanted a zebra, the unicorn need not apply. Right? So that was a problem. The bundled hiring now pushes away from the unicorn and tends to encourage fungibility across teams. Now you remember I mentioned that we have teams and they need to be minimally viable and we want T-shaped teams. So we shy away from hyper-specialization and toward essentially having an 85% overlap in skills inside of a team and then a slight variation for subspecialties. So the bundled hiring helps us there. It also helps in that we're no longer looking for unicorns, we're looking for a horse, and that's easier to find. Please.
Now, New Relic, due to the nature of software, also has the SDKs.
Yes.
Which are running, I assume some of them are technology stacks you don't actually use as backend services.
Yes.
How does that work? Those are just like separate teams for these SDKs, or are they just integrated across the teams who produce APIs? And how do you hire for that so that's still T-shaped with the rest of the organization?
So we're moving in the direction of everything having an API. Everything. The services that our engineers consume, what our customers consume, we're trying to make them the same wherever possible. This is a request that comes from our customers. What we're finding is that our rate of growth is so high that customers want to extend our product, similar to your value proposition, right? Your value proposition is that you're built on APIs and customers can extend. we're moving in that direction. Before we were a product company and you had to wait for us to create a product, now we're moving into the direction of a services-based company with a plethora of APIs that you get to consume and to extend at a rate faster than we can do in-house, or in a way that we wouldn't do because it's not part of our mission. In order to pursue that API goal, we actually have a team of architects that works across teams to get coherence on the API efforts. As if you've ever been involved with multiple teams and an API definition, it's all over the map, right? From crazy to crazier. And then occasionally a mistake is made, and there's something that's good. So we have a team of architects that basically their job is to look at API performance and extensibility, viability across the team.
So that's how you get the API, that's how you get the SDK.
We don't tend to actually have an SDK in the traditional sense of a whole toolkit associated with producing software.
So if you want it, for example, I can install on a stack to send the defects and measurements to your software.
That's embedded in the agents, which you talk to through APIs.
How big is that architect team? What's the ratio between 500 architects?
The architect team is approximately 12 people. 6 of them are embedded in the teams, and 6 of them are part of the centers. So the ones that are embedded in the team are trying to get architectural vision for a time frame from 0 months to 18 months. The ones that are central are the longer time horizon from a year and a half to 3 years.
How often do you find yourself rebalancing the number of teams, the number of people in teams?
Well, in fact, actually, that's something we're looking at now because we may have actually gone a little too far in the number of teams. What we're finding is that we're always on the edge of viability. You know, someone leaves, they win the lottery or whatever, and then, suddenly there's a team that's questioning its viability. So we are looking at perhaps reversing some of the number of teams so that we have more resilience with respect to viability. That happens to be kind of a top of mind subject for next week when I go back. So there's an engineering leadership meeting where I'm teeing this up as the big question. Now, of course, the teams want to take it the easy way, which is, hey, we're hiring 100 people, just plug it with new hires. Well, yes and no, right? It may stop the current bleeding, but it doesn't bode well for the future. Please.
Since the certain strategies are not so tied to a particular subset of topics, how is the team defined? What tools do you use to define what the team does?
So in the process of the 6-month journey that what we'll call the upscale champions that they took, they actually were the ones that defined the number of teams and what the team's reason for being was, a thing we call a charter. So a charter is like the Bible. It says what you are responsible for. And it is how they operate. So each team, by virtue of how we went through the process, has a charter. Now, if they wish to change the charter, that is a process that like amending the Constitution, is iterative and involves other teams. Because when you add together all of the team's charter, you have a whole, like a patchwork quilt. It has no holes in it, or a jigsaw puzzle. If one team autonomously changes their charter, then we have it doesn't necessarily fit the available space. They may have encroached on someone else, or they may have shrunk their charter so the piece no longer fits, to use the jigsaw analogy.
Yeah, because I guess that in the end, the sound model needs just to be whole, right?
Yes.
You kind of have gaps, because we just
Yes.
somehow a strict partition or a overlapping subset, but still the whole has.
Yes, and your question is actually a perfect example of something that management could have never done. we would have never been able to stitch together 45 teams with specific charters so that it created this one big painting. We wouldn't have been able to do that.
From that point of view, though, you ever find yourself in a position where you feel like giving input to the teams, like you see something and you want to transmit a message, and you have tools to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. The one thing I will keep emphasizing, and you have to experience it to really know the truth of it, is that teams are largely motivated by connection with other teams and with connection with each other. So it is with regret that a team says no. Right? It is with regret that they cannot serve your needs. They try very hard for that to be a last resort. And a lot of that has to do with our company values. One of them is connection, that we see ourselves as family and we operate that way. And that brings all of the world of difference, that if teams were autonomous and antagonistic with each other, this is a formula for failure, right? I'm only going to do what I do, and whatever you want, you can forget about it, because I want to control my destiny, and you're asking for something that isn't part of my destiny or doesn't align with what I think is optimal. So I'm going to tell you no in order to optimize my team's success. Well, given that we are seeing engineering as a whole, this doesn't fly, just emotionally.
But still, sometimes it doesn't happen that you have teams that maybe are weak. Probably answering my question on my own, but anyway, we are finding the situation where you have teams that are not mature enough to actually understand the way they're working and not understanding that they need to look around.
Yes. Each team is along an evolutionary path. Not unlike a human being. As a child, a teenage, and an adulthood. And yes, we have teams that are newly formed. For example, just before coming here, there was a team that was part of the research team working on a next generation product, which was a machine intelligence engine that would look at all of the data and suggest to the customer what was wrong with their environment based on doing pattern matching. Well, this was in the research team, and now that team is moving to the product team, but they're brand new to the product team, to how the product team operates. They have a new manager. So we see them as an infant. And so we expect a little less of them, right? That we don't expect them to be an adult at this time. And the work we hand them is commensurate with where they are in that evolution. So there's a wisdom with respect to expectations that matches the team's ability to stand up and deliver.
Still doesn't account for helping them get there, right?
Yes, this is where I mentioned that there were communities of practice. This is where those help out. So we know that this is a new team. And those that are part of the community of practice, especially around educating engineers, adapting people to the new tool chain that they have to adapt, these people reach out, they kick into gear, and invite them to the communities of practice and help them get up the learning curve.
Last question, will you participate in that?
I personally participate in it. Actually, my role, if you will, is sniffing out that it needs to happen and giving a little elbow. Yes.
So you have 45 teams.
Yes.
Who proposed those? Like initially.
This was the 6 months, the 10 people for 6 months, they came up with the current structure. And it has its benefits, but one of them, the downside is that we may have gone too far where if any one person is missing from the team, it can make them non-viable. So I handle it, yes.
Talking about your role again, what's the difference in your system between VP engineering and CTO?
CTO, we don't have one. So that makes it easy. Yeah, no, so in our world, the equivalent of CTO is the chief product officer, who is my boss. brilliant man at Apple, Wiley, great guy. When we say CTO, we think of people that are doing what I'm doing now, talking to people, evangelizing. The equivalent of what you're asking for a CTO is our chief architect. Okay, questions are posed. Self-selection, crazy idea. We did it anyway, and it was a triumph. Everyone got their first choice. And what that meant is that people that wanted something else, when they saw teams that were empty, made that their first choice. They, like those people in San Francisco that were obeying the lack of stoplights and an honor system, they were honorable in this situation. With the contract on the team that as soon as they could go to where they wanted to go, they would be allowed to. So self-selection actually had some surprising upsides. One was it unleashed the power of self-determination. This is the part that I think we all know, right? Which is if my promotion or my opportunities inside of a company is dictated only on the things I've done and what I've demonstrated as being good at, I'm pigeonholed. It's like an actor who's typecast. I can only do those things. Self-selection allows people to move to new disciplines and learn something new, something that for them is brand new. And a lot of people took advantage of it. In fact, what we found, we thought that no one would switch teams. It turns out 43% of the people switched teams or switched roles within teams. So this was pent-up demand that essentially said, our current previous organization actually had people locked into places that they didn't want to be. It created amazing work models. I won't dwell on this, but the Insights team, who was actually one of our more radical teams, essentially created its own development pipeline and demos and retro model. They also embraced and pushed to the limit mob programming. So the way they work is a small team of about 6 or 7 people. There's one person at the keyboard, and all of the engineers sit around the keyboard, and they work as a team to create the next line of code. Yeah, pretty out there. Okay, so wrapping up, it really worked. Forget the graphic. Sorry, I forgot how long that takes. So if we look at the 2 dimensions, how agile are we and how fast do we produce? At the point I did this slide, which is a good long time ago, we were 2x in each dimension. So if you do the dot product, we have 4 times the production possibilities we did in the past. These numbers are now 3 in each direction, over 9 times more capable. Given our definition of agile, we are 9 times better than we were when we started this journey and getting better every day. Solutions are much more business optimal. The rest of the business loves us. What we used to be is like, hey, well, this is what we can do. We're not that great at what we do, so let's do the things we're good at, and not necessarily the things you want. Well, now we're much, much better at giving them what they want, because this capacity that we have, where we're now 9 times more capable, gives us the opportunity to basically point these teams to more targets and to get more done. And this is probably the most important, that the teams see themselves as running their own small, impactful businesses, and they're crazy about it. They're crazy about it. They own it. It's theirs. And they're fiercely proud of it, and they bring that love with them in the door every day. So this is now everyone's reaction. Unlike before, we're nuts about what we did. It was bold, it was crazy, it pushed the envelope, we were nervous, it felt like we were walking on this wire walk, we could fall off any minute and kill ourselves, but it didn't happen. And the vast majority of companies that do this, and there aren't that many, but the few that do have a very high success rate of being successful. It does challenge our mindset, our gestalt around what is engineering, how we operate, what are the power structures, what are the communication structures. It violates all of that, but as it turns out, it is wonderfully aligned to next generation deployment and next generation architectures. and therefore has a high degree of success if you are moving as a company in that direction. So what you should take away from this talk, you hire smart engineers, trust them. Trust them in ways you don't today. What could it be that they actually hold the secret to a better organization, and that they're sitting on that secret because you haven't opened the door to let them express it? Oh, hands went up and down.
If things are running like business, what happens if the business goes wrong? Like they take their own choices? I mean, what are the consequences?
Well, let's see if I can answer that in a way that actually just is the joke. There are enough guidance, checks and balances that it is it's a vanishingly small probability that a team is completely wrong-headed. So the way, remember there are these product groups. You need to work on one of those. Now, let's say you pick the wrong one. There was one that was higher value than the one you picked. Now, you're free to do that. But what will happen is your product manager, who's in the team and helped make that decision, will take it to his boss, the VP of product management, and says, we choose this one. The VP says, well, wait a minute, there's this other one that has more revenue or in a shorter period of time or is a better choice. Ask the team if they'll reconsider. They don't reconsider, they say, no, here's why we think our decision should stand, and then they put a counter argument. If that sways the VP, fine. If it doesn't sway the VP, it goes to the product council, which is this larger body. We have a conflict between what the team wants to do and what the VP says they want. How do you team decide? And that tends to be about a 50-50 split between what the team wants and what the VP wants. And that's intentional. We don't want to overrule the teams all the time. But we also don't want them going off into the weeds. So this checks and balances tends to keep people from going off into the weeds. There's another hand.
Yeah, so are you basically saying that we should start our careers there as managers and then eventually go to
Yes, I am saying that managers are a devolved form of life. I'm just kidding. No, what I'm saying is what I said at the beginning, that certain things require the 50-foot view. The more complex a system is, the more nuance there is in the system, the more the organization that deals with that system needs the 50-foot point of view. That's what I'm saying. Please.
Are you afraid you're eaten by your own success? You say you're growing madly, hiring lots of people. You have 45 teams, but if you hire that many more engineers, they wouldn't fit in your team anymore. If you products, you change your whole architecture, and so on. How does the whole thing scale if you've done
Well, success. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And in fact, this was the reason why the monolith broke, right? Because we scaled really fast. And we're still scaling just as fast. Except now the multiplier is on a larger base. So it's more of a challenge. This is success. I mean, I could wish it away and the stock price wouldn't be so good. And, but I'm not going to do that, right? I'm going to cope with it. So yes, it's a hard problem. Dealing with scale.
How elastic is this sort of organization?
Okay. I see what you're asking.
I mean, I've worked
So, yes. So the reason we love this model is that it, as opposed to a hierarchical model where there's centralized decision-making, since the decision-making, as much as we can make it, is on the edge. You remember one of our principles, the manifesto? The decision-making is on the edge, where possible. Well, the more teams I have, the more decision-making gets distributed to the edge. So it scales nicely. In a hierarchical model where decisions have to be made in the center, you have a bottleneck. It's just like computer architecture, right? If I have more things serving a queue, I have less of a backlog.
But it's also the other way about having a graph and sometimes communication or n log n tree. That's the other side. If you say you have 10,000 people and not half.
Well, here's my counterpoint would be this. You look at a place like Google, you look at a place like Amazon, vastly larger than the Relic, and they're bought into this structure. So I at least know it scales that far, so I'm good. I'm cool. Go with it. Please.
Have you had the situation yet where the team/service became so big you had to split it up into two?
Oh yeah.
What's the process for that?
The process is the team basically gets to figure out through the architect what is the split, and therefore what is the modification of their charter and the other team that would possibly have to be impacted by that. The other alternative is that teams join together, they become one team.
Should it happen too?
Yes, it has.
What was that one thing that you think that was crucial to make this work? If you had to choose one thing, say, without this, it wouldn't be possible. Or
all right, I'm going to say something.
Maybe it was a cake on the table or something like that.
No. Well, what I'm going to say is going to sound kind of like out there. Hey, that's why I'm here. You had a talk this morning on mindfulness. Were people here for this? Yeah. There is, just as inside of a human being, there is our mind, and we spend a lot of time in our mind, and this mind often tells us how difficult things would be, how risky things are, brings fear to the table. And mindfulness helps you deal with this. So it is true in any collection of human beings. When you look at Jung, he talks about the collective unconscious and the collective conscious. This is true. That in our organization, we had great fear about doing this, not only in the team, but in the teams that were stakeholder teams. And there comes a time where the big thing is very simple, and that's at the collective level and at the individual level. You take the leap of faith. And faith in this case is defined as belief in the absence of evidence. We as engineers are not trained that way. We tend to be fact-based, we tend to be evidence-based, but some things around transformation will not have evidence ahead of the fact. They will only have evidence after the fact. That is what this is like. And that, for me, was the most significant part of the journey, where we as a group took that leap of faith.
You just knew it.
We did not know it.
Yeah.
What we knew was that our belief would overcome the obstacles. That the sum of our parts was so great that whatever got in our way, we had the faith that we could fix it, even though we didn't know what was going to be ahead of time. And that has been true. Okay.
What would you say is the sign for an engineering organization to say we need to refactor our entire organization and wholesale like you did? Like, what's the telltale?
For us, I can speak, and for other, I've been in other companies where we've run into the same thing. There is a incongruity between what you dream as possible and what the reality is. And that gap gets bigger and bigger. And it gets to the point where essentially it violates your ability to reconcile the gap. There's so much cognitive dissonance between who you dream of being and who you are that you're forced to either change your dream or change who you are. That's what it was like. This is why when the monolith blew up and we had all the services, we just hit this wall where we were writing checks that our organization couldn't cash, right? Will this be out on time? Sure. No. How about next time? Absolute no. Right? It just, the checks always were bouncing, right? All right. So you got great people. If you give them the remit to look at the organization. And the interesting thing about this, you don't have to commit to doing it. We did commit, but after the 6-month project. So what I'm saying here is that here at Contentful, you have the possibility of creating one of these tiger teams, having them go through this journey. You don't have to pull the trigger. but I bet it would well inform what you do for your organization. So it's not one of these throw yourself on a bed of nails or not. It's, there is a blend. We were forced into it because we were essentially not delivering. We had to do something. But you're probably not in that position. So you can view this as a small set aside. I'm going to invest 5, 6, whatever is the appropriate number for your organization, have them go off, do this think tank exercise, spend some money with this consultant, see what you get. See if this does have the ring of truth. Yes.
So one question, even though the decision was to take the leap of faith, I mean, how was the transition from one model to the other accomplished? Was it all in game?
Yes, this self-selection event. So I get up at the self-selection event and I am supposed to give the motivational speech. I talked about that journey across San Francisco. I talked about one other situation. I'll share that with you because what I said is that there were 3 values we needed. We needed to be connected to each other, really believe in each other. When we couldn't do, believe the others could do. The others that we needed to be passionate. We were about to set out into the unknown and it will challenge our courage and our conviction. So we needed this. But the third thing, and this was illustrated by a business event I went to, was that believe that the universe wants to act in your favor. And this is actually a phrase that is in the little shop that I go to in Bali. There's a little shop and it has this sign that says, believe that the universe wants to act in your favor. And I saw this maybe 30 years ago and that stuck in my head. And it's been part of my operating model as a manager ever since. I find that people will rise to the occasion. And my illustration of how powerful it can be, the San Francisco story was one of them. The other one that I told them, I share with you now. So I was part of a business delegation from a company called BEA. We were working with Charles Schwab. The manager on the Charles Schwab side of the deal was a notorious ass. He was a vicious man. If you walked in late, if you didn't have things to spec, he would tear you to shreds. He was vicious. Everyone feared him. So it turns out it's a short walk from our office to their office. And as I'm walking across the street with my team, everyone, I am the leader of the delegation, so I have to be there. There's a woman who's trying to cross the street. She is in one of those walkers. The light is changing too fast for her to get across the street. And my team is rushing past to go, and I can't do it. I can't leave this lady like this. And so I tell them, you go ahead and I'll catch up. And they're like horrified. This man is going to massacre you. I said, I don't care. I don't care. This is the moral choice. So I help this lady. I'm on, it takes 2 lights. I've got to, I get her across the street, then I gotta wait for the light to change again, and then I race across. I get into this meeting. I walk in the door, it is dead silence. Everyone is sitting there with their hands on their desk, and no one is saying a word. The guy who was the jerk is sitting there, and it's very clear, I could feel it, that he had demanded people just sit there and not do the meeting until I showed up. So I am thinking, well, this deal is in the crapper. And he opens up his mouth. He says, could you come to the center of the room? So I come into the center of the room. And he says, is it true that you held up this meeting to help a little old lady cross the street? I said, yes, sir, it is. And he was silent for a moment, and I was waiting, bracing for hell to break out. And he sticks out his hand and he says, this is the kind of person I can do business with. I'm going to my desk to sign the contract. The universe is on your side when you act with conviction, with love for each other, and with boldness of purpose. The pessimism we have as engineers will melt away. Our creativity counters the pessimism, just like you're solving problems every day. You start out with the pessimistic point of view, oh shit, oh, this is really going to be bad, blah, 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 blah. But you get past it. Your creativity kicks in, your thirst for success kicks in, and you achieve. This is true at the root level also. This was true here. So, thank you all.